Hello and welcome to the Idaho Reports podcast. I'm Logan Finney. The cost and availability of housing is of constant concern here in Idaho. State lawmakers have assembled an interim committee to study housing and land use over the summer. The group held its first meeting this week at the state capitol. Max Pond, Government Affairs Director with Idaho Realtors, started with a snapshot of housing inventory across the state.
Today I want to kind of break down some of those numbers with you, but before I do, I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. You know, what is inventory? What exactly are we talking about here? So for our purposes today, inventory or months of inventory means how long it will take to sell the active listings in the current market. Again, we're talking about single family homes, townhomes, things like that. Having about 6 months of housing inventory is considered really more of a balanced market, while inventory under 6 months of supply tends to drive prices, squeeze potential buyers through bidding wars, and really price out first-time home buyers altogether. For the last several years, Idaho's months of inventory has been well below even the national average, which is currently sitting at about 3 months of inventory statewide. Again, that's Idaho's statewide inventory at about 3 months. The national monthly inventory is right around 4 months. So what does that tell us? Well, I think it's indicative of inventory shortfalls really being a nationwide problem, not just a problem here in Idaho. Only 11 of our 44 Idaho counties have 6 months or more of housing inventory. So what does that mean? Well, I think it means that we're able to demonstrate that housing inventory is a severe problem here in the state of Idaho, across the state. But what does it mean practically for people? Well, practically last year in 2024, again, this is a statewide figure, a starter home, which is kind of defined as a home which is priced in the 25th percentile in that market, meaning 75% of all of the other inventory is more expensive than this particular property. It would cost that potential homeowner over $426,000, a monthly payment of over $2,500, and an income of over $100,000. Ultimately, what this means is that many families' wages have not grown at the pace as housing costs here in the state of Idaho, and therefore homeownership is essentially out of reach for them.
Ketchum City Administrator Jade Riley spoke for the Coalition of Resort Cities about some of the policies they're using to support housing for the local workforce.
The backbone of our local economy is small businesses. They have struggled for years to retain and recruit an adequate workforce to housing. For example, in my community, we have lost over 300 long-term rental units in the last decade. Said another way, our community went from a housing stock 20 years ago that was evenly balanced between ownership, long-term rental, and second homes to an inventory that is currently over 60% of that housing stock is now in vacation or short-term rental only. In each of our resort communities, we see similar macroeconomic challenges of limited supply of privately owned property and private development market that has predominantly focused on high-income product. This is further exacerbated due to our construction labor costs are much higher due to the fact that these companies need to pay a higher wage to help those workers commute further from the job site, as those workers cannot live not only in the community they work, but even close to the communities they're serving. It's important to note that each of our towns are trying to address different income levels with housing solutions. There's a perception that we are only focused on low-income households, when in fact it's more difficult to produce middle income due to the lack of state or federal resources. Typically, federal resources have focused on low or very low income, and then state resources have helped cities focus on middle income categories. How are we attempting to do this? First, our members completed a community-based needs assessment where a housing action plan was developed. And the major focus of each of those plans was how to partner with the private sector to address this shortage. During that process, several of us facilitated sessions with private development partners to understand the barriers or opportunities they see that could be addressed locally. Each of our housing plans seeks to introduce greater supply of both rental and ownership products for workers through the following policy areas: zoning and land use policy, utilization of publicly owned property to the long-term lease to develop workforce housing, providing limited financial incentives to encourage long-term rentals versus short-term, and then partnering with the private sector to construct new units. While inclusive zoning is not allowed in Idaho, we have offered upzoning opportunities for those developers who are willing to build deed-restricted workforce housing. This approach gives the developer a financial incentive. Most of us have also worked to streamline the permitting and fees process to align with producing more workforce housing units.
Can you speak a little bit more about the deed-restricted housing programs that you're looking at?
What happens is we have two different programs, and each of the cities do it a little differently, but generally it's based on kind of a program in the West where, let's say you wanted to sell your unit. What you would do is come to the city or a housing authority, and we would purchase a deed restriction. It's usually around 20% of the value of that property. And really what you're committing to do is place it to only be owned by another local in the workforce area. That's really all the deed restriction says. It usually doesn't even have an income cap. It just says you're going to sell that to another local. What resort cities have seen is anything, I used to have this statistic and I can give it to you afterward, but a high percentage of our transactions go to out-of-state investors. So really this deed restriction was keeping locals for local workforce, and that was available to either a seller or a buyer. So a buyer could come and say, I'm in the market to shop. I want to purchase a property. I will, when I purchase a property, places a deed. They too get a financial incentive to do that. And that's kind of the essence of what we call our ownership and preservation program. And then anything we do with a developer, say an upzone of a project, that is not done just we hope it will stay affordable. We require a deed restriction, usually in perpetuity, or at least for a time period, to ensure that stays at the income level it should. And we've had many of us have had that upzoning program with developers. It's been, very successful. It's obviously limited. It's a voluntary program between the city and the developer. But I think many of us have found developers feeling like it's been a beneficial tool.
Executive Director Michelle Griffith from Arch Community Housing Trust in Blaine County discussed some of the partnerships they've undertaken to develop specific housing projects.
Our most recent partnership is between the cities of Sun Valley and Hailey and Arch. The project is called the Ellsworth Inn at the moment. It's in downtown Hailey, and it came on the market. It's 2 acres in the middle of downtown Hailey. And the city of Hailey was concerned that because of the size and the location of the parcel, it would be very attractive for market rate development, which would result in the loss of 2 historic buildings on the property, as well as the opportunity to house locals. They needed a funding partner and approached the city of Sun Valley. The city of Sun Valley agreed to purchase the property, and the 2 cities together issued a request for proposal for developers, which was awarded to Arch. The Arch development proposal included renovating the historic inn and cottage on the property, as well as building 12 new units of housing, totaling 19 workforce housing units. The city of Sun Valley receives the right of first refusal on 4 of the 19 units for city employees, as well as a proportional split of the revenue for all 19 units. The project is specifically for households earning between 80 and 140% of area median income, and with one of the household 30 hours per week or more for a Blaine County-based employer. The inn and cottage have been renovated and rented, and we are now starting the new construction. I would say that these partnerships are the only way to move forward with workforce housing. There are no federal or state programs that support this sort of housing, and it's critically important, not only because we need these employees, but also because If we don't address these households, they will then fall into a greater financial burden. You don't need a great deal of subsidy in order to support a household earning 80 to 140% of area median income. But if you do nothing, then you need substantially more subsidy as that family falls further and further behind.
McCall's Community and Economic Development Director, Michelle Gronvelt, talked about how local governments can streamline permitting and paperwork for housing projects.
I think initially when we looked at it, we looked at our overall timelines, and we have actually pretty quick timelines in McCall. Obviously we have to meet public noticing requirements, so we can't go any faster than that. But more recently, we did start talking about bigger projects, especially as it relates to fast tracking with, I think, engineering tends to be often the holdup in the process. So kind of trying to fast track those projects and figure out a way to move them even faster. Basically, it's the idea that you're on a fast track, and so when a project submits, they often submit preliminary engineering, and then there's a lot of back and forth. And I think in sort of being fair in the past, it was like you kind of get in line in terms of the project. And the idea is that there would be an alternative track for these local housing units. So they would basically skip to the front of the line in the review process.
Mayor Trevor Chadwick of Star talked about how growth changes the makeup of a community, as well as the infrastructure needs that come along with it.
Some cities control their own sewer and water. They have their own fire. They have their own police. Other cities, like the city of Star, we deal with fire districts. We deal with sewer and water districts. We contract our police forces out there, right, with the county. We also have highway districts that we're dealing with, and we're a dual county city. So we're split basically 2 miles in on Ada County side, and we're all the way 2 miles in on the Canyon County side. So we're dealing with two separate county governments and everything that we're dealing with on top of the other challenges that we have. But when you look at our sewer and water, I'm just going to talk about that for a minute. We have a very high efficiency sewer and water system that allows us to grow and make some additional changes with some additional bucks. But because of this rapid growth we've seen, we just had a big upgrade on it 4 years ago in our district, and they're in the process of upgrading again. But we have some financial challenges, is my opinion, and we need to find ways to streamline through all these cities in the state of Idaho to be able to service housing with sewer and water. On a $40 million project, just in the studies that they're going to have to do, it's costing us additional $4 million as a community to pay for the studies that we just did studies 6, 7, 8 years ago on the other upgrade that we did. So I think in essence that we have to find ways to streamline some of those processes to reduce some of the cost on that end so it doesn't get passed on to the development community, the housing community, and ultimately the residents with the increased property taxes and whatnot that's going to be associated with that. We also have challenges, in our community on infrastructure when we're talking about schools. But I will tell you, I am very thankful for what you guys have done on providing funding for our school districts. We're a beneficiary of that because of our growth. West Ada School District is building a $25 million school basically with no property tax money. It's all coming out of the funding that you guys provided them. And so that helps us with capacity at our school districts because in the city of Star, a lot of our students, and this school is going to start in June, over half of our students get shipped 7 miles in a different direction to go to elementary school because of the overcrowded issues that we're having. Now, on the Canyon County side, we're also dealing with the Middleton School District. The Middleton School District is, unfortunately, they don't have as much money. They're using some of the money you provided them, but they're still going out for a bond, and people don't have appetite to bond things, obviously, right now. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens next week, right, is our elections for those. In the city of Star, when we're talking valuation, Star became a city for the second time in 1997. That was the time when the citizens of Star decided that they were going to grow. And I do know I've heard conversations about how you deal with the NIMBY attitude out there. And a lot of that is just tackling it head on and just having those conversations, because what we're seeing from folks that are moving in, and a lot of the folks that are coming in the Star really from out of state, and from the 3 states on the West Coast primarily, but I've seen them from all over the country. But it's sitting down and having a conversation with them so they understand how the process works in the state of Idaho. And even when you get people that are coming into your council meetings to be that NIMBY, I hate that word, but to be that NIMBY, to go in there and try to stop projects, you got to be willing to stand up and educate. right? And make sure people understand that we truly believe in Idaho and private property rights, right? That's a very big fundamental that we have, and we live by that in the city of Star tremendously. And that we have a right, farmers have a right to build houses, or not build houses, sell their land. You know, they're going to grow houses instead of growing crops out there, right, in our communities here. You know, after working on those farms for 50 plus years and create generational wealth. The price of land has become ridiculous. And that, I believe, and my background's commercial construction. I was a project manager and estimator for commercial construction for 19 years. And it always ended up that the guy at the back end had to take the heat for whatever happened at the front end. And so on the front end of housing right now is the cost of land. So land in Star used to be $25,000, $50,000 an acre. Recently, we've had property sell for $350,000 an acre. You're looking at $80,000, $85,000 already without infrastructure being put in at the price of that house at the very beginning, if you're just doing 4 units per acre. With the infrastructure challenges that we have, we can't afford to go at higher densities. We can't, our roads aren't sustaining it, our sewer and water currently, unless we could get this thing built sooner than later, won't be able to sustain that as well. Right? So there's a lot of challenges that we're facing in our communities from a city standpoint on trying to make sure things work. I love the conversations we're having because that deed restriction talk has really got my wheels turning, believe it or not. And I'm a guy that likes to try to figure out solutions to the challenges that we're facing. And I'm very upfront and honest and stuff. And I will just tell you, in the city of Star, I'll just tell you what a permit fee costs on a 2,000 square foot home to be built in the city of Star. Just to get a building permit in Star on the Ada County side is $24,000. On the Canyon County side is $25,000. And the reason for that is we have an Ada County Highway District impact fee on the Ada County side. That's $3,493. We have Star impact fees, park impact fees of $2,100. And I had to put in what's called police and fire mitigation fees. I had to work with the Building Contractors Association, Mr. Burgess and his team, to try to find solutions to pay for the public safety in our community as we're growing, because we cannot fund it and finance it, and that's the challenge that we're facing right now. I only levy, as a city of Star, being only 25 years old, or we're more than that, 27 years old, $2 million of property tax on a $4 billion value. Very little money that gets levied, and 100% of that money goes to my police, plus the mitigation fees that we're collecting that help offset that cost for that growing need that we have. We also have our water district connection fee of $2,950, our sewer district connection fee of $5,000. Our permit fees is $2,200. A plan review fee is $1,500, and application fee is $50. So that's the cost just to build a 2,000 square foot single family home in the city of Star. That's a lot of money, but those homes are selling for $500,000 to $800,000 depending on what side of the county you live on, right? Back in the day, my very first house I built in Star was $97,000 for a 1,700 square foot home. That same house today is selling for $700,000. It's incredible to see the growth or the cost the cost spikes that we're seeing in our communities, and it's not solely on the cities and this process that we're paying here. It's just on the market and the free market system, and people being willing to come into the state and throw incredible amounts of cash at homes. I've had neighbors in my neighborhood sell homes for $150,000 more than what they were asking, and they had bidding wars on that. And so, of course, that's causing this challenge that we're seeing all over the place with housing. My poor kids growing up in Star, Idaho, that are anywhere from 21 to 27 cannot afford a house in our community at all. They're going to have to move away in order to survive. They can't do it. And I will just tell you a little bit of statistics, too, on some of these housing costs. Where you look at an average rent on an apartment in the city of Star for 1,900 square feet, just an apartment is, I'm sorry, not an apartment, but I will say the horizontal apartment, the single family homes that are turning into apartments, right, is anywhere from $2,400 to $3,000 a month. Who in the world's affording that, right? The average apartment cost on our vertical apartments there for one bedroom is $1,600, and on a 3-bedroom is $2,300 on that. The housing cost all across the board, regardless of the type of housing, is spiraling out of control, and we got to figure out a way to address that. That's where this discussion today hopefully drives some of the policy decisions or ideas or solutions that we can work together between the cities, counties, and the state and the private industry to try to figure out funding mechanisms to help drive some of those costs down. Because the free market is a very basic principle of our society, right? It's just what it is, right? But we got to figure out a way to attack that a little bit different to assure that we do have that attainable housing in our communities for folks. I'm going to tell you right now, the salary I'm on as mayor, I couldn't live in my own city if I didn't buy my house before this craziness happened. You know, that's the crazy thing to think about. I saw some report that Idaho, it takes $165,000 in income in a family to buy a 3-bedroom home, right? It just blows me away, right? A lot of that's not happening here in our state, you know. So, but we do have a lot of people moving in that are working out of state, right? And so it's kind of it's an interesting dynamic we're faced, I think, right now.
The Land Use and Housing Study Committee will meet again in June. You can find more details on the legislature's website under 2025 Interim.
Celebrating 75 years of science and innovation, Idaho National Laboratory's 6,200 researchers and support staff are advancing the nation's nuclear research, renewable energy systems, and cybersecurity solutions. Presentation of Idaho Reports on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho, by the Friends of Idaho Public Television, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.